Thank you. I appreciate it. So yes, I'm a realtor, and I am not a presenter, as you can imagine. So I have to read my notes as much as I can. So I'm here to talk about buying and selling old and historic homes. And of course, I'm not talking about my job as a day-to-day realtor. I'm specifically talking about old houses. So we're going to be you're going to get the difference. I'm not going to be doing a listing presentation for you. I'm not going to be telling you how I'm going to market the homes. I'm talking about the ins and outs of buying and selling. So first, I grew up in a small town. I'm from Fairbury, Nebraska. And when I lived in a small town, it's a cute little town. It's listed. The downtown is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. It's got beautiful cobblestone streets. It's one of the most heavily treed towns in Nebraska, and it's an amazing town. And I grew up living in an old house, and I didn't realize that it was old. My whole life, even though we moved around a little bit, we always lived in old houses, and I didn't know any different. So the house I grew up in Fairbury was a Italian 8 built in the 1870s. Of course, it was chopped up into apartments. And then briefly, I did live in Seattle, and we lived in a mid-century modern house that was really awesome with tons of glass. And then I came back and I moved to Beatrice, Nebraska to go to community college, and I lived in a craftsman home. Then I went to UNL and I lived in a brick duplex that was built in the 1920s. So I've always lived in historic homes. But I never really knew it. I never really paid attention. I didn't even care. It wasn't until I became an adult and I started to really pay attention to my surroundings that I really fell in love with the homes. So then I moved to Omaha in about 1995, 1996. And I just gravitated towards the older areas just because that's what I recognized and that's what was fresh to me. So I ended up buying a home right around the Field Club Ford Bursite neighborhood, right where the two meet. And it was condemned when I bought it. And we just started to restore it. And that is what got me specializing in old homes. I was spending all my time working on the house, and I was falling in love with what I was doing. And then I decided I wanted to make this my business, and so that's what I started to do. So, and even now, I don't live in Field Club anymore. I lived in a mid-century modern in Indian Hills, and that was a fabulous house. And now I live in a brick house in Dundee. So I've moved around. The newest home I've ever lived in is 1965. So anyway, I fell in love with Omaha. I fell in love with the houses. I fell in love with the neighborhoods, and specifically, I fell in love with the history. Now I forgot to say my home now is a John McDonald house. For those of you that know, he's a famous architect. So I moved to Omaha in 1996 to become a realtor, and it was by default that I grew into the old homes. So I started to work on the old house. I started to make real estate my career, and I started specializing in old homes. And that was when, at the time, there was still not a lot of people that really cared about the old homes or Midtown in general. So I eventually started a team called the Good Life Group, that's what she was talking about, and then I was able to turn that into Better Homes and Gardens. So now I'm co-owner of Better Homes and Gardens Real Estate, the Good Life Group. But what happened is I'm able to, because when I had a team, it was a giant team, and I wasn't able to focus on old houses. I had to kind of keep it quiet because I didn't want all my team members to be pigeonholed to be old house people as well. So I would talk to my clients and say I was the old house specialist, but I never advertised it. So then a few years ago when we became Better Homes and Gardens Real Estate, now I can scream it from the rooftops. I started a new team called Old Omaha Vintage Real Estate Team, and this is all we do. So what is old? When we were starting to start our team, we had to identify what an old house was. And what I mean by that is, like dates, like what are we going to focus on? And it was kind of funny. We had a lot of discussions as to what our focus was going to be. And finally, we decided anything before 1978, because we like lead paint. That's just the way it goes. So we consider 1978, because there are still some pretty great houses that in the 70s, some pretty high style mid-century homes. So anyway, now, old homes, it's all about emotion, and you're going to hear me talk about that a lot. When it comes to buying and selling old homes, it's an emotional process. If it was purely logical, we wouldn't do it. If logical, you could make all sorts of excuses, how new is better, or different things. But we like old homes because of the way they make us feel, the way they make us, the way the neighborhoods make us feel. They tend to be in the city, they tend to be more urban, walkable neighborhoods, tend to be closer to things that we can get to. But we fall in love with them because of their style, because of the wood floors, the woodwork, the built-in buffets, the elaborate fireplaces. These are the kind of things that we love love about the old homes. Of course, the craftsmanship of the finishes and the craftsmanship of the actual construction, real brick homes, so things like that. But it's also the history of the homes, the history of the neighborhoods, the people that surround us, the normal grid-like streets. It's just easier to get around in the city. So it's not just the houses, it's also the neighborhoods. But it's also the fun stuff like that we fall in love with. The servant stairs, the butler's pantries, the dumbwaiters, the radiant heat, or like the house I have for sale right now that has gas lighting and the original servant bell system. So those things are really fun. We don't always get those fun things, but it's still really fun. So the other thing is socioeconomic. A lot of us tend to like to be in the city. We like to be more in a more diverse neighborhood socioeconomically. And so there's a lot of reasons that people fall in love with the houses. So now, a brief history about the real estate in Omaha. So our real estate market has always done very, very well for most of you that you know. And when the real estate market crashed in 2008, our older parts of town didn't feel it like other parts of the city or the country. And the main reason it is because our values had always, up until that point, had appreciated at a max of about 3% a year. It was a slow and steady appreciation. And so when the market crashed, we didn't have as far to go. And so our areas did pretty well. Now the market has rebounded from that and it's gotten even stronger. So even in 2015 is when we really started to see it come back really, really strong. And now 2017, 18, 19, the market is still very, very good. It has softened just a tad for a lot of homes. You get the higher price range homes, the market, they don't fly off the shelf as easily. You hear the market's crazy. It's usually more the normal price range, the $150,000 to $250,000 price range. That's the hardest hit. The other thing that I think is amazing is that people talk about how there's nothing for sale and there's nothing to buy out there. And the reality is there's quite a bit. And there's, especially if you're willing to push the limits on neighborhoods. These neighborhoods, white flight is real and it still haunts us today. And there's still plenty of parts of Omaha that are up and coming back. And they're beautiful and we need people to invest in those neighborhoods. So I'm talking about buying and selling old homes. So I'm first going to talk about buying and what it really needs, what it really boils down to, and how it's an emotional process. When you're buying a home, you get very emotionally sucked in. And of course, it's okay. You want to be sucked in. You want to feel good about your house. You want it to be a place that feels comfortable to you all the time. It's okay to get emotional about the house, but you just want to try to be smart about it. Recognize that you may be swayed by something that's really important to you. Maybe it's a friend that lives around the corner. Maybe it's a doorbell system, whatever. It's okay to be swayed by the emotion, but just make sure that you don't get yourself in trouble. So I'm speaking for myself. I mean, the 3 houses that I fell in love with them. And in all 3 cases, I bought them without any inspections. I just said I wanted it. I wouldn't recommend that. But I knew my risks too. I knew the risks. I've been selling houses for a long time, so I can walk around the house and get a feel if there's anything major here. So it worked for me. But it's not that you necessarily are worried that you just want to back away. It also, you want to know what your negotiating power is. So like when I bought those houses, and I don't regret any of them, but one of them, I didn't notice fire damage once I pulled the drywall back in the ceiling. A home inspector would have caught that, and I would have been able to negotiate. That same house had really, really bad termite damage. It didn't have active termites, it just had termite damage. And I was able to fix it myself, but had I known about it, I would have been able to negotiate those things. So you want to be really careful. One house I had extremely high radon levels, and one house our carbon monoxide was through the roof. And so you got to really be careful and know what you're doing. So I do recommend that you do get a home inspection. That's critical. But of course, the first thing that I have to say when it comes to shopping for a home is to choose the right realtor. Now, I don't just necessarily mean me or my team, but I do mean that finding the right realtor that understands your homes, understands your neighborhood, knows the nuances of the neighborhood and the houses. It's really best to have a realtor that lives in the part of town that you want to live in, or at least has an appreciation for it. Now, where am I? I lost my place. Inspection. So you definitely want to get an inspection. Of course, everybody knows that, and you want to say that. But the same thing goes for as a realtor. You want to make sure that your inspector knows what he or she is doing. You want to make sure you get an inspector that knows old houses. I have had several home sales fall apart over a home inspector that honestly didn't know what they were doing. And I'll tell you, the reasons are crazy. One of them, I had a home inspector that was adamant that the front porch had a slight angle to it, and it's supposed to. And the buyer backed out over it. The buyer backed out because they said the inspector was adamant that it was supposed to look like a deck, that it was supposed to be 2x4s, it was supposed to be flat, it was supposed to have a gap between the two. And I was standing on the front porch and I was saying, water and snow runoff, this is how it works. And he just didn't get it. I had another one back out over a boiler. They walked in the door and the home inspector had never even heard of a boiler. He didn't know what it was. And he scared the buyer off. And of course, I wasn't there because I was the listing agent, otherwise I kind of been able to talk him out of it. But the buyer got scared because now the buyer knew there was a boiler, but then once the home inspector came in the door and started talking about how scary these were, it scared the buyer off. I also had a home inspector one time talk a buyer out of a house because the basement floor sloped to the middle floor drain. So it really is crazy. So the inspector is just as important as the realtor. One thing when you have an inspection is I get really tired of people throwing around the word code. And they'll always say, well, that doesn't meet code. Well, that doesn't meet code. Well, that doesn't meet code. No, it doesn't. It doesn't meet building codes because building codes have changed. And keep in mind, the word is building codes, not code. You don't have to make an old house. You don't have to retroactively fix old houses. Now, once you have to you need to meet code if you're, pulling plumbing permits and you're doing certain things. There are definitely things you have to worry about. But when I'm talking about code, I'm talking about the most recent things. I was showing a house recently, and the other agent, there's two agents there, long story, was saying how the house wouldn't pass code because the handrail on the front porch was too low. And I had to step in and say, it was built that way. Now the modern building code is a higher one, but the old one is just fine. And so it's things like that. And there's a lot of things. People are always thinking that old houses have to meet code, and they're just not going to. Yeah.
So I've had really bad experiences in the four houses that I've sold. And question comes to mind, how do you find an inspector who understands old home construction?
First of all, your realtor should be able to recommend one. Second of all, there are now home inspectors in Omaha that specialize in old houses. No, I'm not necessarily here to plug them, although I do think they do a very good job.
And as a buyer, can you contract with one of them
Yeah.
instead of?
Absolutely. Well, the buyer gets to choose. The buyer's choosing their own home inspection. We're going to talk about home inspections when you're a seller as well. But typically when you're buying a house, you're able to choose your own home inspector and shop around. I would shop around. I would go online, maybe Google, see what you can find, but also call some of the more experienced home inspection companies and just ask them, who's your more tenured home inspector, who has the most experience with old homes. There's quite a few of them out there. Yeah?
A lot of those things would be grandfathered in.
You're right.
For 50 years.
Exactly.
You replace it.
Exactly. Exactly. That's why we say, old houses, you walk around an old house, you're going to find all sorts of things don't meet modern building code. Yeah, Vaughn?
Tim brought up a good point. Hire a realtor that lives in one of those
There is.
houses. Find a home inspector that lives in that one. I'll give a plug to Hunter Home Inspection one time. And I was blown away how he explained the windows, the boiler, how it all worked to the buyer. And we were on the buy side, and they had hired him to come in. And
Hunter?
Yeah, Hunter.
Yep.
I can't think of his
Matt Baker, Hunter Home Inspections. Yeah, he's my favorite. I was his realtor years ago.
He understands it.
He loves old homes, and it's also his bedside manner, and he's really good at explaining things to people. And you want the home inspector to tell you everything. You don't want no stone unturned, but you also don't want the home inspector to scare the crap out of you. You want one that's realistic, that is going to be able to tell you the good and the bad, but also not freak you out. But yeah, finding a home inspector, and by the way, that home inspector lives in the same neighborhood as Vaughn. And I use him all the time, Minnelusa. So, Matt Baker with Hunter Home Inspections. I love him. He's absolutely fantastic. So when you are buying, I'm kind of random and I'm bouncing around again because we're not talking about buying and selling houses. We're talking about the differences with old homes. So when you are buying a home, the different things you have to concern about are the different hazards, such as asbestos. So asbestos it's all over the place. We deal with it on a regular basis. I get frustrated when somebody sees or hears of asbestos and they run screaming. And the reality is asbestos was a really great product at one time. Don't get me wrong, I'm not advocating for asbestos. I'm just saying don't freak out. You've already been in houses with asbestos. You're breathing it in. Now you want to minimize your hazards. If you see asbestos, it's typically on pipes in basements around ductwork. The best thing to do is to not disturb it. The best thing to do is to seal it, cover it, and have it done professionally. You can do it yourself. I'm one of those kind of people that do it myself. But don't freak out because you see asbestos. Same thing goes for asbestos roofs. Those asbestos tile roofs. We still see quite a few of them. And the reason we see them is because they were intended to last 100 years, and they really have. Those roofs were fantastic when they were new. Some of them are still repairable. I've had many sales fall apart because they think that, oh my God, it's asbestos, I got to back out. It's really not that big of a deal. First of all, there are plenty of roofers in town that deal with asbestos removing roofs. And if you shop around, they don't all charge an arm and a leg. So I've seen asbestos roof removals as low as $500 extra. So they're not all that crazy. So I just wouldn't freak out when you see asbestos. Radon. Radon is something we deal with on a regular basis with all homes. I get questions asked all the time, are radon levels higher or lower in old homes? It's the same. It's the same. Well, I have had some houses that had really thick concrete floors in the basement where the radon level was never going to come through. But for the most part, radon, it is what it is. Lead paint. So lead paint, of course, is the most common thing people are going to ask when they're shopping for a home. I will tell you this, in my 24 years as a realtor and thousands of houses, I've never had anybody test for lead-based paint. And I don't recommend they do or don't because it's for their choice. But the thing about lead-based paint is that I always tell, and we as realtors typically tell people, if you're looking at homes built before 1978, just assume it has lead-based paint. And if you're totally freaked out about it, then maybe you shouldn't be looking at houses that are older. But the lead-based paint hazards, they're real. I'm not trying to downplay the hazards. I'm trying to downplay the fear. So typically, if you have a house you don't want your paint to become friable. You don't want you don't want your peeling or so that it gets dust in the air. Typically, the people that are the most at risk with lead-based paint are children and elderly, and it's mostly because they're the ones that are more likely to chew on a wall or consume the lead in some way. So it happens. Lead in soil. So lead in soil was a big deal in Omaha in 2003. The Superfund came around, replaced a lot of lead. I have to admit, last week was the first time in my career somebody backed out of a sale over lead in soil. It surprised me. And again, and I mean this politely, if that's going to be your freak out, then maybe you shouldn't be looking at an old home. So I'm not saying it's not a hazard. I'm just saying it's mitigatable. And the EPA is still doing some replacements on spot on. So you can still call them if they never tested. Mold. Mold is of course, this is something you deal with all houses. We see a lot in old houses because there's going to be a lot of times there's basements that have been ignored for long periods of time. In this part of the country, we typically don't see that much of the serious molds that cause a lot of serious damage. Of course, there's a lot of different test companies out there that can test your home for mold, and there's lots of different things that you can be done. But it's not that hard to have a company come in and get rid of the mold and clean it up. The reason I bring this up is because I do see people get really scared about mold, and it's typically pretty easy to handle. Now, on the flip side of that, I remember one time about 20 years ago, I showed a house in the Fort Burnside area, and it was in the middle of summer, and it had been closed up with no heating or cooling. And I walked in the door, and the floors, the walls, and the ceilings in the whole house were covered with mold. That's a serious one. That's really bad. And the worst thing was, because it was to the point where it should have been torn down, which was awful because it was a beautiful home, but it was really bad. Somebody bought it and just painted over all of it. So I keep waiting to see that burn down or something someday. Carbon monoxide, again, that's something that we deal with on a regular basis. You got to be careful with carbon monoxide. And now the laws are changed that now homes have to have carbon monoxide testers. But the only reason I'm bringing that up is that one thing that people often do now they think it's trendy and fun is in their kitchen they'll take and they'll knock the brick or knock the plaster off of a brick chimney. And that's fine. They have the exposed brick, totally fine. It looks really good. However, you have to make sure that that chimney is lined at that point because the carbon monoxide hazards jump exponentially when you have that exposed brick and if that chimney is actually being used. So it's really important to make sure that that chimney is lined if you have exposed brick. Now we'll talk a little bit more about heating and cooling. So in older houses, you're going to get these kinds of things on a regular basis, like I talked about boilers and radiant heat. I love boilers. I love radiant heat. I've had it in 2 of my Omaha homes, and it's just such a warm, wonderful feeling. There are lots of different companies, I should say lots. There are several companies out there that still do service boilers. So I know I get people thinking that there aren't anybody. There are several. There's some commercial ones and there's some residential ones. I use Iman Plumbing. For mine, Jay Ryben. Jay Ryben's always been part of Restoration Omaha. He used to have his own company, and now he's merged in with Iman Plumbing. I use them on a regular basis. But if you've never heard of a boiler, or well, sorry, because they're such a simple, wonderful heat. They're easy to use, they're easy to function, they're more warm. People oftentimes think that when they see a boiler, they think the house is inefficient, and that's not the case. Actually, boiler radiant heat is one of the more efficient heat sources. It's typically, a lot of times, the houses that have boilers can have less insulation, or they don't have central air, and those issues you can talk about. But the boiler itself, I just absolutely love boilers. And I have to always tell people when I'm with a client and they see a boiler for the first time, because you'd be surprised how many people still have never seen a boiler like that home inspector. But I tell them how wonderful they are and how at this point, I would never live with a house without one. And they still use radiant heat all over the world. So I really love my radiant heat. But a more serious thing is old oil tanks. So in old houses, we see these all the time, where you might see an old buried oil tank in the yard, or maybe even a freestanding one in the basement. They're fine, but the problem is if there's an oil tank in the yard, it is important that you, the buyer, make sure that it's empty, or have your home inspector test it. It's not that hard for them to go test to see if it's empty. If there is oil in it, there are companies that'll go down there and suck the oil out. And then there's other companies that will fill the oil tank with sand. And that really is important because I have seen homes in Omaha where they haven't done that and the oil tank has been sitting empty for a long time and it starts to collapse on itself. And then you start getting a sinkhole in your front yard, or worst case scenario, it could be a really bad hole and somebody could fall into it. So you want to make sure to be careful with that. Same thing, once in a while we see oil tanks that are still standing in basements, and they're totally fine. Just make sure companies will come out, take the oil out, and usually the best thing to do is just leave them alone. I have seen people cut them and turn them into bars. I've seen them turn them into all sorts of fun stuff. It'd be a messy project because I'm sure it's very gross inside there.
Have you had any issues with city ordinance with having the old oil, like you're just going to leave it in place and then you find out that you got a water line, potable water line running into the house? Has that been an issue?
Not that. Usually the city doesn't get involved. When you're buying and selling a house, the city's not involved unless you're pulling a permit or you're doing some type of a construction. So I've never had any issues with anything like that.
We had a lead line going into our house from the city when the city told us we needed to replace that lead line, which of course we didn't know about.
Right.
The city told us we found that tank.
They found
The
that.
city wouldn't allow us to run a potable water line. 20,
Okay.
30 feet of it, so.
That's one of those things that happens. You'll learn about it when it happens to you. So I never had that. I have not had that happen, but that does make sense. So the city got involved because you're running a new line. So that does make sense. So would they let you leave the tank in the ground and just go and maybe run a new water lines in another way?
Leave the tank and then we'd have to run the water line
Yeah. Around it. That does make sense. That makes perfect sense. One thing is, now with the new advent of these mini splits, heating and cooling, you know, I'm talking about the little heating and cooling elements that hang on the wall. That has really helped old houses, because now you can have an old house with a boiler, you can add air conditioning or supplemental heat, and they're fairly inexpensive. It really helps if you've got like a Craftsman or maybe like a Tudor Revival home where you have a dormer second floor and it's always hot. Those little air conditioners are amazing. So my field club house, which had a boiler, we added central air to the second floor. And we were going to do one to the main floor. We just hadn't done it yet. And it was a nice big open floor plan. We had one window unit, which I don't hate window units. They're unsightly, but other than that, they actually are very efficient. But we eventually put in a Mitsubishi mini split. That thing was amazing. My main floor was always cool to the point where I had to turn it off a lot. And I never took it off the low setting. So those heating and cooling elements, they're called mini splits. Definitely good. So whenever you're looking at an old house and the second floor doesn't have much space or doesn't have any heating up there or cooling up there, or maybe an attic, consider adding one of those, and they're not that expensive either. Sure, absolutely.
Are they, I can't remember, are they ductless or do
Yes.
you have to duct them to the
They're ductless. Well, no, to the outside. I'm sorry. So it hangs on the wall wherever you want, and then you do have tubing that does go out, and then there is a handler outside, a compressor outside.
Just a quick question, with the boilers, do you use humidifier, room humidifiers?
You know, I have not. I haven't had to. No, my first house, we did have, it came with these really wicked little rods that you put in between the radiators and you filled them with water and the steam would come out, but we never used them. So, but I never had a problem with it. But you know, some people really need more humidity or less humidity, so it depends on your personal. Foundations. So that happens a lot. You see, as a matter of fact, I had to leave and go show a house just a short bit ago. And this house that I'm about to put on the market, all of the basement walls have anchors all around the walls because the walls have settled a little bit. And I can tell you that when I put this house on the market, it's going to stress some buyers out because they're going to see those anchors and they're going to be afraid there's something wrong with the foundation. The truth is, this house did not have proper gutters for a very long time. The water came down on the side of the house. The foundation walls pushed in just a little bit. And to be honest, they're not bad at all. I probably didn't even think they needed anchors. But once you have a basement wall that has anchors, it's actually stronger. So they say they're great. So I wouldn't worry about the anchors at all. If anything, they just help stabilize the foundation. Windows, I don't think I need to beat a dead horse on windows since we've been talking about windows so much here. I am an old window person. I love my old windows. My field club house, I did start restoring the windows, and I was stripping them down. I was doing them one at a time, and they were looking really great. But I admit I gave up and I bought new windows because we were working on everything, and there were some things we just weren't going to get to. Now I would restore them. But I will say, when I did that, I replaced them with wood windows with aluminum clad exterior, and they were really, really high-end windows. And it was a Victorian house, so I took all the hardware off the original windows and put it on these new replacement windows. So they looked, I mean, you could tell that they were new, but they were a really good match. Plaster, we see plaster all the time. I love plaster. I like plaster walls. Some people freak out because they think, oh, if it's a plaster, I can't work with it. It's easier for me to patch a plaster wall than it is for me to patch a drywalled wall. So, but the other thing about plaster is just a house I sold last week. So it was in Benson, cute little house. Lady had been there for 60 years, and after her kids were all gone, she stopped going upstairs. So she turned the heating and cooling off on the second floor for, I don't know, 20 years, 30 years, forever. So all the walls on the second floor have all these big cracks all over them. So our appraiser made us get a structural engineer report, and I knew exactly what it was. It was lack of consistent temperature control. So you'll see that a lot. We're cracked plaster. Insulation, obviously, it's easy to blow in insulation. Insulation in attics is awesome if you can just get the blow-in cellulose insulation. That's the best way to do it. I don't remember where I was going with that. But I see something here out of place. Back when I was talking about the yards, is also a lot of times you have cisterns in the yards. And you want to make sure that the cistern, it's an old cistern, you're going to see maybe you might see a lid or something on it. And I've seen them cave in. So it's no reason to be panicked. Just make sure if you have some of these old cisterns or oil tanks that they're empty and they're filled in so that nobody it doesn't collapse underneath somebody's weight.
Question.
Sure,
Cistern.
sure.
If you have an older home, how do you know if you have one or not? Would it be on the survey?
No, you don't necessarily know. And I'm not even saying that you need to go out and find out. I'm just saying if you know there is one there, be cautious of it. Yeah. No, they're typically you don't know. I have heard of people that they can take the tool and they can walk around your yard and see if there's any hollow spaces under there. Now, I shouldn't have brought that up because I don't know who they are. But I've heard of it done. Yeah. And because one time I had a client that they had heard there was an old oil tank. And so they wanted to find it. Oh, and I remember it was because there had once been a pool in the yard. And the people were trying to restore this historic mansion, and they wanted to bring the pool back. So they hired a company, and they wanted to put it where it was and everything. They hired a company to bring tools out to find what was going on underneath the yard so they could figure out where the pool was. So it's definitely possible. So, any other questions on buying a home before I move into selling homes? Yes, Vaughn.
Do you recommend that you camera the sewer line in all homes?
That's a tough one. What do you do, Vaughn?
I didn't used to believe that you should,
Mm-hmm.
and I've been burned a couple times.
Mm-hmm.
So you learn from mistakes. So I recommend if there's a lot of trees in the yard and stuff, and you got the house, it looks like the plumbing's running down the driveway. I recommend that you camera the sewer.
I do agree.
That's
The reason I say that the reason I'm a little bit more cautious is because it depends on how bad you want the home, and it depends on your negotiating power when you're negotiating the offer. Because if you're in a multiple offer situation and you ask for a sewer scope, yours is the first offer that's going to get kicked off. That's not fair. I'm not saying that's right. I'm just saying that the seller's going to do it, because if the seller is looking at your offer and you're asking for a sewer scope. By the way, I'm waiting for the results of a sewer scope in Minnelusa right now. Yeah. So, and I'm a little nervous about it. But if you start the minute if the sewer line is cracked and it does need to be replaced, it's expensive. All the more reason for the scope. So you could be I've had it done as little as $5,000, and I've seen as much as $15,000. Now, what I really wish Omaha would do. No, pardon me. Sorry, replacement. Sorry, that's replacing the sewer line. Sorry, yeah, I talked too fast. Replacing the sewer line. The scope's only $99 or something like that. Yeah, $150. Yeah. Go get a scope. Yeah, $15,000. No, sorry. No, just replacement can get very expensive. But at the same time, yes, I do agree that having the sewer line scoped would be ideal. So that's up to you as to how you want to handle it.
But your point on the multiple offers, it's unbelievable. But doesn't move now.
So when I wrote that offer in Minnelusa, we were not in a multiple offer situation. So and they had lots of big trees in front. So we did ask for a sewer scope, and they were okay with it. But yeah, so it's kind of a slippery slope, because the minute you have a sewer scope, then you're opening up. The seller is going to be open to if the line is cracked or broken, they're going to have to replace it. And I know what I was going to say. I really wish Omaha would get on board in Council Bluffs. They're I think Mid-America or whatever their sewage company is. They have an insurance plan. It's like $4 a month or something like that. And if your sewer line ever cracks, they'll replace it. And God, I wish we had that in Omaha, because if we had that, I would be pushing it on everybody to have that little insurance policy, because that's a big expense and there's nothing worse than having to spend $15,000 on a shitty pipe. I mean, and you're never going to see it. So
Was that a private insurer, or was that?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. That's part of the MUD, or it's not MUD in council. I think it's Mid-America Energy.
Okay, so.
But yeah, it's through them. Yeah, so if you live in...
Some company doing it now, because we've got a flyer, but I don't know who it is.
So do you live in Iowa?
No, I live in Dundee.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah, I got one the other day. I live in Dundee as well, and that one's for water supply.
Oh, that's water.
Water supply. And that's $5 a month for water supply. And I thought to myself, damn, I'd rather pay $5 a month for sewer line insurance. The water supplies, I can get that done for $3,000. That's not nearly as expensive as a sewer line replacement. So now I'm going to talk a little bit more about selling homes and helping if you're going to sell an old home, which, to be honest, is really my specialty. So I do help people buy homes, but I spend far more time helping people list and market homes. So there's a lot to talk about when it comes to selling a home. And again, I'm not talking about all selling homes. I'm just specifically talking about the old ones. Again, it's imperative that you have the right realtor, and I feel even more so when you're selling a home, because you want to make sure the person understands homes, they understand the nuances, they understand all these problems that are going to come up with asbestos and lead and all these things. I have to tell you, so I recently went in December. I was called to these people's house in Dillon's Fair Acres, and they wanted to possibly put their house on the market, and I was the third realtor there. And when I walked up to the house, they had been there since 1955. They built the home, the original family. We just closed on it yesterday. I could already tell there was some emotion going on I'm dealing with adult children, moms in a nursing home. But when I walked up, I saw the original metal windows, which I love. I think they're cool. And I was like, oh, I love your metal windows. And the one daughter looked at me like, you're crazy. And then we walked in the house, and I saw the floor, the flagstone floor, which was in perfect condition, and a stunning spotlight light fixture. And I'm just dying. And then I'm walking around the corner, I turn into the kitchen, and it's completely original. All the copper handles and everything. The study had all the original hardware. The doors all had the Sputnik light, brass doorknobs with Sputnik on them. Anyway, it was a stunning house. And finally, after we were toured through the whole house, I remember one thing. In the study, there was a little trap door in the back of a cabinet, and I said, love that. And she said, what's that for? And I said, it's for your table leaves. You take your table leaves and you around here, put them right here. And then she looked at me and she goes, you really do know old houses? And I said, yes, I do. Well, apparently they didn't believe me. They thought I was faking it. They thought I was lying about everything, because the previous two realtors that had come through both said the house was so hideous. One said the house was so hideous she wouldn't even advertise it with photos. And that she would market it as a tear down or a gut job. And the other realtor walked in and she was just like, gross, this is gross. And she just said that they had to gut the kitchen. It was dated. The house is immaculate. I mean, this lady took care of it. It was flawless, but it was all original. And so they were going to gut the kitchen per what this person told them to do. And so not only was I just like in love with the home, I was able to we sold it for over full price with no inspections before it even went on the market to somebody who is going to keep everything about the house. So my seller saved a lot of money. But the same thing, because they were going to gut it, the same thing goes for the house that I just bought in Dundee. I've only been there for a year. And the realtor recommended to the sellers that they replace all the windows. And don't get me wrong, it is nice to have all new windows. But I have a brick house with all new beige vinyl windows. I hate them. And I would have paid, they left me the receipt, they paid $45,000 for these windows. I would have still bought the house for the same price without those windows. And their realtor just gave them bad advice. And so it really is critical. Not everybody is going to feel that they need to have everything be replaced. So emotions are high. You want to make sure that the buyer, we know that the emotions are high and it's okay. You want to leverage that from the buyer. You want the buyers to fall in love with the home from the moment they're walking into the house. Studies have shown that the buyers fall in love with the home within the first 10 seconds. So it's really important first of all, use professional photos. I know that sounds like a no-brainer, but it's not. And studies have shown that homes with professional photos sell for 6% more than homes without them. But also, everybody shops online now. You know, when I first became a realtor, we still had the MLS was books. It wasn't on the computer, and it was a manual key. I really am that old. And now everything is the computer, as you can imagine. So the photos have to show the house. But the other thing I do, like if I have an old house that has flaws, I don't hide those. I want my photographer, he's my photographer full-time on purpose, because I want he does photos the way I like him to do them. I don't want them to be photoshopped. I don't want them to be airbrushed and make the woodwork pop more than it really does. I don't want any of that fake stuff. I don't want any fisheye lenses. I don't want any wide angle lenses. I want the room to look the way it possibly can. Now, a good photographer is going to get all the way in the corner as they can, and even some step out of the room, and they're going to get those shots. But But anyway, so you want to make sure the first seconds are really important. You want to make sure the buyers are falling in love with the home. When the buyers are, imagine this, when the realtor is standing on the front porch and fumbling with the lockbox, the buyer's looking around and they're already starting to pass judgment. And so you want that front porch to look really cute. You want to charm it up. You want to make it look like an extension of the house, even if you don't use it that much. Put out the furniture, put out, porch swings, make it look as cute as you can. Obviously, things like flowers and flags always work, but those are emotional things. Make sure it's clean. Make sure the light bulb works. Make sure there's no dead bugs in the light bulb above your head. But also look at the neighbors' houses. If your neighbors' houses are really bad, you might want to volunteer some of your time to help them clean up their yards, to help them out. And I know it's a tough conversation. I'm gonna sell my house. Your yard looks terrible, but depending on your relationship with your neighbors. Anyway, but that's a good one. Accentuate your front porch. You get the porch swing out. Pay extra attention to the front porch. It really is an important one. Always have your buyers come through the front door. Buyers don't fall in love with the back door. You might only come in through the back door, and that's fine, but the buyer has to come through the front door. That's important. Where am I? Use the floor plan as it's designed. Now, I don't mean, like if you use a bedroom as an office, that's fine. We all do that. But I'm talking about if you use your front living room as the dining room and then your dining room as the living room, that's fine because it works for you, but that's not the flow of the old home. Unless it just happens to look like it makes sense, which doesn't usually happen. Usually you want to move things back. If you have a dining room set up with an office, get it out of there. People are going emotional, so you want to make sure the floor plan flows the way it's supposed to. And of course, certain things like just polish up your woodwork, polish up your wood floors. As you know, wood floors can't be refinished forever, so you don't always have to refinish the wood floors, but just polish them up, maybe use just something like Murphy's oil. I will say that even buyers that prefer carpet still respond well to clean wood floors because there's a sense of clean and fresh. So just spruce up your wood floors, go around all your house and wipe down all that woodwork and give it a little buff. That's really going to make a difference. If you do have carpets, have them cleaned. That just seems like a basic thing you would think. Clean your windows. And I know that sounds crazy too, but I have houses right now that are, very expensive houses that the windows are filthy. Or one house in particular that I put on the market and the sellers left town and I took over the house, and every single light bulb in the house is a twisty halogen or different light bulbs, or some of them are burned out. It's really, that is so easy. Go through the house, swap out your light bulbs. Swap out with like regular incandescent light bulbs. Don't put in the fluorescents. They cast a very unflattering light. And make sure that the lights look good. When you make sure in the basement that all the lights work good. If you go through the whole house. If you have closets, turn the lights on, but make sure the lights work. People get especially turned off if they go in basements and closets and dark spaces and the lights don't work. It gives this negative impression. Going back to the windows, clean your windows, get them open. Yep.
I found too that, I'm not plugging the window company and I don't know one, but if you are going to clean your windows, professionals clean the windows, I'm not sure what they do, but there's a huge difference. Like they reflect or
They do.
differently or something. I don't know.
It makes a big difference. Now I have my windows cleaned every spring and fall. And it makes such a difference. It's so funny because I always tell sellers to have your windows cleaned, and they're always like, oh yeah, we meant to do it. And every single time they always say, we forgot how beautiful the windows were or whatever. It's really important. So get the windows cleaned, but also try to get the windows open. If the windows are even remotely openable, get them open. People want to be able to open and close the windows. And if the house is going to be going for FHA or VA or any of those kind of government-backed loans, at least one window in the bedrooms has to open. So I would start working on some of those windows. Curtains and blinds, open them all up, let the sun in. Even if you like it to be a cave in there, people typically don't buy caves. They want it to be light and bright. So get that looking really good. I already talked about the light bulbs. I'm bouncing around. Clean and organize your closets. I hate to say it, a lot of times old houses do have smaller closets, and if you open a closet and it's bustling with stuff, it might be how you lived, but it's just immediately giving the impression that there's not enough storage in the house. So clean that up. I will say, and this is just me on my soapbox, clean your refrigerators and your stoves. People will judge you. on how clean your refrigerator is. So even if it's staying or not, they're going to open it, and so clean them. It's really important. And also, you really are selling the home, but you're selling the whole experience. So you want these people to walk through this house and it to be as clean and feel as good as they possibly can. Basements. If you have an unfinished basement, it's just get it as clean as you possibly can. My recommendations are make sure the lighting is nice and bright. Really important. If you don't have good lighting in there, add more lights. Clean the walls, clean the floor. My biggest thing that I push almost all the time in an unfinished basement is to paint the basement floor. It's one of the easiest things you can do. It's so simple and it freshens the basement up. I will tell you, my field club house, when I went to sell it, the worst part of my house was the basement. I hated the basement. It was not very nice. It was dark, it was stinky, it was dirty, and we didn't even store anything down there. But when we went to sell it, we knew that we had to clean it up, otherwise nobody was going to want this. And so I did what I just talked about. I just put in some stupid lights, cleaned the walls. I hired somebody to come and clean the walls and scrape everything down. We painted the floor, and we were done. It was so nice and clean that now the new people that live there, that's their kid's favorite place, is the basement. And it was so scary. And all it was lighting and paint and cleaning. So it really makes a big difference. Okay, now it's time to talk about pre-inspection. So if you are going to have an old house and you're going to put it on the market, I do highly recommend having it pre-inspected. That would be hiring a company like Matt Baker. I'll come out and do an inspection in advance. The positives are when somebody brings you an offer, there's already an inspection. You already have an idea of things that it needs. No house is going to be perfect, so you don't have to fix everything on that inspection report. It's more like you're selling the house and you're letting people know this is what it is, and we've already priced it accordingly. The downside is if you have a pre-inspection, you might find some stuff on there that you have to fix or you have to disclose. So there is a little bit of a risk, but because sometimes you don't want to have to disclose something and then people don't want the house anymore. So, but I'm a big proponent of pre-inspections. It helps, and actually statistics do show the houses sell for more money with pre-inspections. But also, your home is going to be on the, it's going to be off the market for less time. So like if you do have it pre-inspected and a buyer brings you an offer based on that inspection, then you can theoretically put a sold sign on the yard the next day because those contingencies are finished. One thing is filling out the seller property condition disclosure statement. So when you're selling a property, for those of you who you have to fill out a seller property condition disclosure. It's a checklist of the condition of the property. Post-closing lawsuits are very rare. Less than 0.1% of homes end up having half of 1% have any legal actions after closing. However, when they do happen, they almost always involve the seller property condition disclosure statement. So, because it's all about, they didn't tell us this. So it's important to be honest about that. I would rather see you lose a buyer than not. And so I would be honest about that. If you know of anything happening in the neighborhood, you know that they're about to turn the street in front of you into a 4-lane highway, you have to disclose those kind of things. But in an old house, one of the biggest things that comes up on a regular basis is people ask if you have to disclose deaths. And when somebody died in the house, deaths, if somebody has died in the home. No. You only have to disclose a death if something illegal happened, such as drugs or murder. You do not have to disclose a death if it was suicide or an accident or old age or anything like that. However, I recommend you do it. I recommend, first of all, it's an old house. Chances are somebody probably died in it. And if you don't tell them, the neighbors are going to. So I would recommend you just disclose if somebody passed away in the house. So no, I'm talking about in the disclosure statement. Well, no, sorry, yes, if it comes up, because that's not in the disclosure statement. I'm not doing that. I'm almost done. Insurance. So we're in a heavy hail area. I mean, we all know you pray for hail because you're going to get a new roof out of it. I will say it's unfortunate, but it is what it is. And these things are going to come up. So I would recommend that if you think that your house could have had hail damage, call a roofer that you trust and have them come out and look to see whether or not there's any hail damage. And then if they do say that there is any hail damage, then you call your insurance company. You don't call your insurance company first because just calling them is considered to be a claim. And so that can count against you. And I will tell you 100% of the time, well, maybe not 100%. Most of the time, they come out, they're going to look at it, and they're going to say, nope, no hail damage. And so you need that roofer to be on your side and help you argue it. So recently, the one in Fair Acres I was just talking about, same thing. We had really obvious hail damage. We had a hard time getting the home inspector or the insurance adjuster to come out. The insurance adjuster did finally come out, met my roofer, and he was just about to leave when my roofer pulled up, and he said, oh, no damage. And the roofer said, no, come on. And he showed him, and he said, and he showed him all the hail damage. And the guy said, okay, you're right. And we got a $25,000 roof. And that's what happens because that's their job. Their job is to turn down your insurance claim. So it's really important to handle that correctly. And again, your real estate agent can help you with that as well. If you do have any big ticket items that you know need to be done, like let's just say your driveway is completely jacked up or just whatever, but it's something you don't want to fix, but you want to be prepared, I would recommend you get quotes on those things. You don't have to share them. It's just so that when the house is for sale, you know where your negotiating is. You know what something's going to cost you. Yeah. And that's about it. I guess I feel like I'm missing some stuff, and I'm looking at the clock here.
No,
So,
we have time,
the-
because after this is just a break until the next one.
okay, cool. Well, so the really the boils down to is buying and selling it can be very emotional, and when you are selling, you want to play on the emotions. You want the buyers to walk around the house and fall in love with it. You want them to feel for all the things that you did. You want them to fall in love with it for all the reasons you did. You want to play up the emotion of the woodwork and the front porch, and you want the yard to look as good as you possibly can. You want the whole thing to look as good as you possibly can. But also sometimes what's good to do is to leave a letter. Leave a letter from you on the kitchen table saying why you love the home and what it is about the home, or what is it about the neighborhood, or what is it about the neighbors, because people want to know that. Because those buyers, you're trying to win them over emotionally, and they are falling in love with the home, but they also want to fall in love with the neighbors and neighborhoods as well. Same thing goes for a lot of agents will tell you when you put your home on the market to depersonalize and take all photos out of the house. I don't agree with that. I do think it's good if you have a lot of photos, but if you leave some nice, attractive, especially if they're like professional photography, leave them up, because the buyers fall in love with the seller as much as they do the house. One of the reasons for sale by owners can be successful is because the buyer and the seller are communicating and they're liking each other and they're on their best behavior, and so they love each other and they want to make this deal happen. The same thing can go when you have some nice family photos in the house. Yeah. And in your letter, if you do leave a letter on the dining room table, you want to explain what is it about the neighborhoods you like, what favorite places you like to walk to. Again, sell the buyers on the neighborhood. So, I'm going to say.
Yeah, how about pets, dogs and cats?
Mm-hmm.
How do you treat that, right, in order to give the best impression?
Well, typically, and this is just a regular house for sale question, get the dogs out, keep the yard poop scooped. Typically, cats are kind of going to stay away it depends on your cat, obviously, but typically we just let the people leave their cats in the house, but scoop the litter box every single day and put it in somewhere that people don't have to see it or smell it. That's really important. Part of the seller disclosure, it does ask if pets have been in the home. So some people, if they have severe allergies, they can look at it. Typically, if you have allergies that are that bad, you're aware of it, you're watching for it. I had a client recently that their allergies were so bad, we had to build. They had to build a new house because they just were really allergic to everything. So, yeah. And I am done, so we're just doing questions and answer now.
Okay, if the neighbor has about 2 inches of his porch on your lot line.
Okay. Yeah. Well, then you need legal action on that.
I'll have to put it on the disclosure, right?
Oh yeah, it's an encroachment. It just means that the neighbor's property encroaches onto your property. So you're okay with that?
No, I asked him, but he didn't. I said, we just saw cut your porch, but he didn't do it. So,
Does it hang over?
no, it's just concrete.
Oh, okay, got it. Okay, got it.
No, I don't know when I sell it, what do I say? If the,
It's an encroachment. On the seller disclosure, it's going to ask if you have any encroachments, and you would say, yes, your neighbor's porch encroaches onto your property. It could be a problem. A buyer might get freaked out and say, I don't want somebody else's property on mine. And if
so
that's,
what should I say?
my correct answer is you have to call a lawyer. A lawyer. Because this is a legal issue. I will say, if it's hanging on your property and he doesn't do anything about it, you can cut it off. But I would talk to a lawyer.
Two quick questions. How much for house inspection, for inspection?
Oh, it's usually the same cost as a regular inspection, so we're talking in the $350 range.
Okay, and then I'm just curious, that house that you said the first two realtors hated,
Mhm.
and, you know, and you fell in love with it.
Mhm.
What was the tipping point that you convinced them, hey, this is a beautiful home? Don't gut the kitchen. What happened? How did you do that?
One of my biggest successes when I go on listing appointments is I show genuine love for the homes. And because people want you to like their home. And so I don't know, I think the tipping point was when I told them that I knew that that little bin was for the table leaves. And they realized that I did actually specialize in old houses and I wasn't blowing smoke. And the rest of them I told them was true. And that there was a buyer out there that would love the home for what it already was and it didn't need to be gutted. And so they just believed me. And they didn't live here. One sister lived in New York, one sister lived in Sweden, and the other one lives in Chicago. So they didn't have time to do all that. They didn't want to do any of that. Yeah, they were gonna hire somebody out to come and gut it while they weren't here. Now, in that case, now as a realtor, it's our job. We get paid to buy and help people buy and sell houses, but the majority of what we do is actually not the details of buying and selling houses. It's all the other stuff. So, like that house, yeah, I sold it without even putting it on the market, but I was 3 months of me helping them negotiate all the work with the estate sale people, getting repairs done, getting the estate sale out. I mean, it was helping them coordinate the closing of it when they're in 3 different places and countries. So that's what I got paid for, is to do all that. So.